You are listening to Shravana, the Rashtram podcast, and on this episode of Shravana, we are bringing to you a topic which is titled Sanskrit, Encapsulating Civilizational Codes in Wordscapes. I am Srijit Datta, and you are listening to Shravana, the Rashtram podcast. Namaskar to all the listeners to this episode of Shravana the Rashtram podcast. Today at Shravana, we are lucky to have with us Dr. Anuradha Choudry, who teaches at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. And she's also a member of the Rekhi Center of Excellence for the Science of Happiness at the same institute. A multilingual Sanskritist, Anuradha ji works in the areas of Indian yoga psychology, philosophy and culture, and travels extensively across the world to deliver lectures and conduct workshops on these topics for national and international organizations and events, including the annual Yoga Congress organized by the European Union of Yoga in Switzerland. Recently, she co-curated the 41 days long Yogathon titled Global Festival of Yoga Celebrating Wellness, which was organized by Indica Yoga. She has published her works in various journals and has co-edited and co-authored books titled Perspectives on Indian Psychology and Happiness, Indian Perspectives. In 2019, Anuradha ji was the recipient of the Excellent Young Teachers Award at IIT Kharagpur. A very warm welcome to you, Anuradha ji, to Shravana.
Namaste Srijit ji, and thank you very much for this very warm and generous introduction, and welcome to this program, and namaste to all the listeners also of this show.
It's our pleasure, Anuradha ji. So I will begin with the questions that we have. Today's topic, I would like to remind our audiences, is Sanskrit encapsulating civilizational codes in wordscapes. This was a topic that Anuradha ji suggested, and therefore my first question to you, Anuradha ji, would be, what do you exactly mean by quote-unquote civilizational codes?
So I'd like to start by introducing this concept of code itself, which is an acronym for me for Collective Oath for Development and Excellence. And when we look at how the civilization was formed, we recognize that from time immemorial, in every age, we have had seers of this land who have established, articulated, and established methods that identified certain codes for society to follow, certain aspirations, certain practices, certain values that would facilitate excellence to manifest consequently in this land itself. So the other word that I normally talk about is I would say the modern acronym for the concept of Dharma. It's the very idea of Dharma is based on the recognition by our seers, the rishis, that the universe seems to follow an incredible order. The universe is anything but random. The way creation functions is anything but random. And therefore, there are laws that govern and that uphold the workings of this universe that we are part of. So these laws are what they in the Vedas talk of as the concept of Satya. And then they said that at first it is important to recognize or to identify these laws, so to know this idea of Satya, but it wasn't sufficient to just know about these laws. The next important step was to be able to implement those laws in the workings of our daily lives at individual and collective levels, because of their vision of this entire system, which was interdependent and multi layered. So they recognized that unless these laws are made operational in keeping with the larger vision of this unified coexistence, there were bound to be mishaps, there were bound to be accidents or insufficiencies that would crop up within the system. So this idea of operationalizing that satya, those truth blueprints, is what is known as rita, or the right. So again, fascinatingly, because I use the term wordscape. So wordscape is really trying to indicate the fact that our usage of certain words refer to a whole landscape of a certain understanding of the universe, the understanding of the world around us. So when they use the term rita, or when we talk in our contemporary times also, we use the term right, which has its etymology in the same root as the same root of rita, which is rit. We are always implying that there is a standard on the basis of which the rightness of anything is being determined. So the concept of right has an embedded optimal standard that it is signifying. But right, as Sri Aurobindo says, is dynamic truth in action, while Satyam is the potential, underlying potential of the optimum functioning of creation. Rhythm is the manifestation of that. It's the operationalizing of that particular blueprint in order for the best outcome to happen. And that best outcome, which is a natural consequence of the practice of Satya, is Brihat, or the vast. So the concept of rhythm in itself implies the knowledge of the Satya and the result, which is the best or the optimum of excellence, which is Brihat. So when I talk of code, I'm referring to this idea of uh, being able to have or being able to replicate. India is a land of a one word constitution, which is Dharma. And the idea of Dharma very beautifully flows, or rather, it captures this entire triad of Satyam, Ritam, Brihat. How, why do I say that? And I'll share my favorite example with you. It's like if you wanted to perform surgery and you wanted to wear a glove in order to perform a very minute surgery on a beloved person, because then the acuteness of the precision becomes relevant. So you will not just request anybody to go and pick up any glove from the market for you, because if the glove is too big, the operation will not be successful. If the glove is too tight, you will be restricted. All this, of course, taking into consideration that you have the necessary skill. So once an individual has the necessary skill, wearing the right glove in order to get the best result for saving the life of your beloved person is mandatory. So when you wear the right glove, then the hand is held in the best way possible. And what does the right glove signify? The right glove signifies the knowledge of the contours of my hand, which cannot be universalized, because this is unique to my constitution, it's unique to my the shape of my hand. So that is Satya. And then to wear a glove that fits it rightly, which is Rita. And therefore, the action that will transpire will be of the best quality, which is Brihat. So when we wear the right glove, then the hand is held in the best way possible, as I said, which is the notion of dharma, which is upholding something. So the very idea of dharma encapsulates the concept of the knowledge of Satya, the practice of Rita, and the consequence of Brihat. And the very foundations of this civilization were not laid down by thinkers. They were not Manushyas who laid down the main foundations of this culture, of this civilization. The founders of the civilization were rishis, which means they were seers. And it's in this context that we can talk of the psychological anatomy that was again recognized by our seers, where they said that an individual is not mind based essentially. An individual has various levels of reality and existence that transcend the mental faculty, and it is possible to train the mind to attune itself with that higher level of intuitive knowledge, which would guide the individual to be in tune with the functioning of the universe. I mean, it's actually very fascinating because it brings up a lot of other questions. And but if I have to just put it in a nutshell, the implication of allowing the faculty of intuition to be a natural extension of our consciousness indicates that knowledge is something which exists out there. And as individuals, we are capable of transcending the limited mental understanding, partial understanding of the world, and reconnect to that intuitive knowledge system which knows the interlinked workings of creation itself. So when we have that bigger understanding, that understanding doesn't happen through manana. Yours, Shravana being the first step, and then of course the manana being a very important next step. But the grasping of that knowledge is not processed through the mind alone. That the mind has to become a more and more refined faculty, which has to eventually open itself to the possibility of seeing these laws operational around us. And dharma, all the dharma shastras were written by such seers who saw what were the optimum codes or the optimum values, practices that had to be practiced in every age, because with the changing ages, the thoughts change, the circumstances change. So, taking that into consideration, they were able to lay down those sets of values and practices, the dharma of that age, to allow society, individuals and society, to follow that so that they can harmoniously, contribute towards the greater good and prosperity and well-being of the entire society and the Rashtram. So, code in that context becomes a set of values and practices that promote the experience of this or this collective oath for development and excellence, founded on the concept of dharma. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Anuradha ji. Speaking of wellness and well-being, I think the analogy of hand, glove, and the perfectly performed surgery that you have given our audience to explain the very intricate concepts of Rita, Dharma, Satya, and Brihat are indeed very effective, I would say.
So I would just like to add here that when one is ignorant either of Satya or of Rita, and therefore not achieving the best results that one could have, it's almost like we are wearing the clumsy glove. So I have this notion of the clumsy glove theory, where at present, with the absence of the understanding of dharma, everything is disjointed and malfunctioning. And we see therefore in the Gita why Lord Krishna, he says, dharma sansthapanatthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. So when everything is out in disarray, out of sync with the larger truth of things, then it's important to once more establish order so that collectively we can benefit from a deeper understanding of these laws.
I'm very glad, Anuradha ji, that you touched upon the concept of dharma specifically and also mentioned Srimad Bhagavad Gita. It actually helps me to lead our audience to the next set of question and answers, which is around the meaning of the word dharma. Because there is a tendency among especially the English educated class of our Indian people, to conflate the words dharma and religion. Of course, not denying that religion may be a part of dharma, but perhaps it is not all. Perhaps the word religion cannot grasp the entire gamut of connotations that the word dharma contains in itself. Would you like to enlighten us on that?
So I would also like to share here that a student of mine, in fact, an intern with me, was given the task of trying to see what is the local understanding of the term dharma. So it's not just the elite English educated group that we're talking about. We're also talking about the ordinary grassroots usage of the term. And what he found is that most often the term dharma and religion are almost synonymously used, which means that there has been a civilizational amnesia about the important subtleties that the term dharma really represents versus the notion of religion, which was meant as a scaffolding to lead us towards the deeper understanding of this idea of dharma. So, very interestingly, again, the term religion in Latin comes from religare, which means to unite. But as time went on, the term religion became institutionalized and lost its original flavor as well, and became limited to a rigid formulation of monopaths, if I may say, rigid practices and rituals, which then also further became empty of their true essence and therefore lost their original capacity to connect the individual with the universe. Because when we talked of dharma as being the foundation of this civilization, the concept of dharma, it was also meant as a way of enabling the individual to reconnect to the satya, which in religion they regard as God, or they call it with different names, but the very formalization of that truth or the personification of that truth within a particular format, a limited format, also began to corrode the essential power and the essential potential of this word of the term dharma, and also of the concept of religare, to unite, of basically helping the individual find his or her place in the larger orchestra of creation. So it's, if I have to give you an analogy, it's really like there's this huge orchestra at play, and the only ones who are out of tune are the human species. There's no other creature or no other species that has any question as to what to do. The only ones who are completely, that scrollless is the human species. And therefore, the objective of religion was, in terms of the more general understanding of the term, was to help the individual recognize their own present limitations and reconnect to the larger truth. But when dharma was bracketed within that same, within the limited formulation or representation of religion as an institutionalized format, then we were removing the essential quality of this term, which was to help us reconnect to Satya, Rita, and Rihat as the larger objectives of our existence here. So I think that one needs to bring back the truth of both terms. So one needs to bring back the truth of the concept of dharma, and to understand that the term of dharma is a means to help us to reconnect to the laws of the universe and our own laws in that process, which was represented by the word swadharma. So to find one's own scroll, one's own note to play in this grand orchestra. And on the other hand, to also probably bring back the deeper intent of the term religion, and enable people to transcend the forms that it has crustified into and allow them to touch the spirit underlying the form. So, in the deeper intention, they are very similar, but in their manifested forms, if they are, if they are used synonymously, there can be gross misunderstandings, especially in the context of dharma, by reducing the scope and the need for its real understanding. When you ask me that, what can one really do about this misreading of dharma as religion, I would encourage people, especially who don't know Sanskrit, to seek the original sense of words by going to the etymology, by going to the roots of words, especially important conceptual words that form the basis of our civilization, especially to invest a little more attention and a little linguistic investment to try to find the seed and then see what specific plant that seed would yield the overgrowth, and believe that that is what that tree or plant was all about. So with dharma especially, this Bharyate iti dharma, that being the root, so that which upholds. So, what is upholding this entire universe? What is it? There is a knowledge. So, how does one reconnect to that in order to be upheld? Dharmo rakshati rakshitaha. So how do we uphold ourselves as a result of protecting this understanding of the functioning of creation? And in this, you see, there is no need to conceive of a God. You can choose to think of that larger intelligence as personalized in a figure of a God, but one is not bound by that because even that God is a representation, that Godhead, whichever Godhead one chooses to subscribe to, is one representation with a certain limited portfolio of the enormous potential and the freedom of knowledgeable being that it represents. So I think this is very important. It's a very important distinction to point out. And just the last thing is because the moment we talk of God, I mean, as evolution progresses, and we are into the mental age, the age of the mind, we see that the very nature of the mind is to cut up reality, to cut up truth, and get into details and specificities of that. So the moment we think of God, then we are bound because it's a personified God. So we are bound to think of it whether it's a male or a female, how old it is, what skin color it has, the person has. These are automatic mental requirements for the clarification of representation. And Dharma has nothing to do with all of this because it's not even concerned with that personified being. It's only concerned with that vast source of truth knowledge that exists and enabling, facilitating the working of everything with a better understanding of those laws.
So, would you say that dharma allows a fair degree of latitude to the person who is specifically oriented to the cosmic order or the maintenance of it? Is that how we should understand dharma?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because anybody, I mean, and this is the whole scientific temper actually. The way science is presented in today's age is it's a very reduced representation of the deeper inquiry for truth that this whole branch of, or this whole discipline of inquiry and knowledge represented. So, anybody with the true scientific temper investigating the underlying laws of creation would necessarily arrive at the seeings of the interconnected functioning of everything at minute levels and in terms of the potential of it all. So, with my little knowledge of quantum physics and all, I know that those who have explored that subject in greater depth, they also recognize that there is this idea of the non-local. So where truth exists, but you cannot pinpoint it to one thing. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist either. But there are relationships. The quantum world seems to function on the basis of relationships rather than rigid forms. And the understanding of dharma allows us, from a socio-cultural, psychological perspective, to allow ourselves to become fluid in our receptivity of understanding the way all of this functions together. So it's actually an adventure, I think, that there are these larger collective laws that determine the functions of roles, etc. There are certain roles, like for example, I'll give you the example of Brahmacharya Ashrama Dharma, another a PhD that a student of mine is doing right now. So Brahmacharya Ashrama Dharma implies that in order to be a student, the Brahmacharya phase, which was much more than abstinence from sexuality, it was really about Brahmacharya, the following of that quest for Brahman. Because once you know that absolute truth, then everything else gets perspectivized and life itself becomes more meaningful because you're already in tune with these larger laws of the universe. And it was therefore the time in which dharma as a purushartha was imparted to the students of the brahmacharya ashrama phase, to a student who would dedicate their life, their thought, their time, all their resources in comprehending the workings of these laws of dharma, would be better equipped to handle the later complex social complexities that would arise in their life. And by an extension, we see that if that training is not given at an early phase, then one is like this boat on an ocean and tossed around by the winds of fate and chance and is a victim of circumstances. Whereas if there is a greater grounding of these laws that work at all levels, at a psychological level, at an emotional level, at a physical level, at a spiritual level. So if one is aware of the workings of these laws, there's a much greater chance of being the master of the ship and navigate through life in a more meaningful manner with clear destinations, with effective tools to handle, with effective skills to handle turbulences, because turbulences will come, it's part of existence. But a better understanding of dharma during the phase of brahmacharya ashrama, which inculcated in the students various values and practices, allowed them to then become better equipped to reach distance shows with clarity and with greater skill.
So, a lot of takeaways from that particular response, Anuradha ji. Firstly, I would like to highlight your radical clarity that you have given to our audience and to me as well in understanding brahmacharya as the path that one sets himself or herself on towards the bigger truth, the greater truth, the brihat, and also bringing the discourse from uh, happiness seeking to truth seeking. So we all know that a certain culture has permeated modernity and even post modernity, where pursuit of happiness originating from the American Constitution, but also then through popular culture and so on, people have come to believe that pursuit of happiness or happiness seeking, gratification seeking, is perhaps the ultimate end of life. But you are telling us that Dharma teaches us, Dharma appeals to us to seek truth rather than happiness. So I would like you to dwell on the concept of worldviews that are radically different in this case, where a particular culture, a particular worldview sets people on the path of gratification, loosely defined as happiness, and there is another worldview which sets people on the path of seeking truth. What would be your comments on that?
I think the USP of our civilization is its almost passionate investigation of the purpose of existence itself. Studies, or they engaged in very, very detailed studies of trying to connect or trying to fathom these their own purpose of existence. And I think that is also directly connected to their quest for truth of things, because it seems as if the rishis very early on, recognize that life as it stands is meaningless for the simple reason that there is a starting and an ending, and with apparently no takeaways of the material existence that the mad drive of existence seems all about. So that realization itself led them to introspect on what could be better ways or more meaningful ways of sojourning through the experience of life. And I think in that process, they also recognized. So when the American Constitution identified happiness as a goal of life's existence, they were also on the right track, but in a certain limited format. Because for them, that happiness centered around the concept of having. So you need to have enough in order to lead a good life. And because it was centered around having, we see in the yogic connection of, cause and effect, that havings really belong to the realm of indriya vishayas. So you need to have the objects, which then are connected to the senses. The rishis at that point, I guess, would have realized that it is not the senses that enjoy the objects, but it is the mind which is making sense of any object it is coming in contact with. And therefore, they also recognize at the same time that if one's happiness was dependent on the external havings of life, then it would be also uh, liable to the sorrow that comes from the loss of those objects. So, very early on, they figured all this out and said that is there a way, because happiness seemed to be a natural driving urge for everything that takes place. And therefore, the obvious question that would arise for them is why? Why is it that we are always seeking this experience of happiness, whichever shade it might be? And whether it was possible to retain, to have a sustainable, lasting happiness, which would not be dependent on external objects. In that process of self inquiry, of course, like we know in the Taittiriya Upanishad, we have Bhrigu's quest to know the Brahman and thereby arrive at the level of understanding himself as, the Pancha Kosha. There's the Annamaya Kosha, then the Pranamaya Kosha, or the physical body, the vital life energy sheath of Pranamaya, then the Manomaya, the mind sheath, the intuitive or the higher intelligence sheath of Vijnanamaya, and then the Anandamaya Kosha. So they realized that their understanding of or their appreciation of worldly goods was dependent on the quality of the mind. If the quality of the mind could be refined in itself, and that process of refining the mind required a stepping back from the normal mental activities. And when they looked inwards to see how you can refine the mind, they realized that that happiness was actually within them. And therefore, it was not, therefore, they did not reject the external world either. And like I said, that is, I think, the real USP of the civilization, that material life was not divorced from the inner life of the individual. And that's why abhyudaya, representing the material prosperity, was not different or was had to go hand in glove with the concept of nishreyasa, which is about the inner freedom. And when they realized all this, they then looked at the lifespan of an individual and the investments one makes in the course of a normal lifespan. They said that civilization, I mean, every human being is looking for four things largely. So there is dharma, there is artha and kama being the very obvious ones. We all are looking for wealth in order to lead good lives. And that's where the American Constitution a little got stuck with artha and kama as their primary objectives. And but they said that you can have artha and kama, but if it is not on the basis of dharma, we are in trouble again. So how do we ensure that you have the best artha and the best karma experience without the pitfalls of these if they are unregulated? In wisdom, unregulated not in terms of a suppression of anything. If they had that sense of freedom from what they were having, and that sense of freedom came about by their quest for moksha. Moksha not being a rejection of the world as it is,
Right.
but about living life with a spirit of the freedom of having things but not being attached to them and therefore being sorrowful in their absence.
Absolutely.
So this was the first kind of a classification that they did of the Purusharthas, these identifying the four goals. And then they said that, okay, these goals, if these goals are there, then the different stages of life needed to cater to the fulfillment of these goals. And therefore, Brahmacharya Ashrama, the first phase, the Ashrama dharmas. So Brahmacharya Ashrama was meant to know about this, acquire that wisdom at a young age, so that one becomes strong within. One has the right alignments in order to stay firm and to make the most of it, rather than being a weak victim of circumstance and having to suffer, etc., etc. So dharma, and then artha and kama, because grihastha, one has one, and the whole objective of creation is evolution, and therefore procreation is important. And to do that, to bring up a family well, one had to have the right amount of wealth that was needed, but the wealth that was not beyond the need of the individual. So that was where dharma laid down the boundaries of acquisitions, rightful acquisitions. And then we had the idea of vanaprastha, where you realize that yes, one can indulge and engage and make the most of it, but then what? Life is not only about how much you've got, because none of this will go through when the chapter closes. So how does one focus on the real things of life? And that was the phase of vanaprastha, and then leading to sannyasa, where one puts one's trust, or one's being One trusts one's being on firm foundations of existence rather than the transient acquisitions that one has. And one focuses on being rather than having. So I share with my students, I say, normally we have these two plots. There is a plot of being and there's a plot of having. So in the Brahmacharya stage, we are made aware of these parallel plots, these parallel plots that are transpiring in our lives. So we have to be conscious of the fact that it is who you become that is important than how much you have. But the having is goes parallelly with that, and everything that you have is meant to feed into who you become. And in during the vanaprastha, one goes deeper back from the plot of having into the plot of becoming. So that in sannyasa there is a full focus on how can one be, and therefore who am I? You know, that koham, the whole civilizational inquiry of who am I, koham, and the grand realization that soham, I am that Brahma, that absolute infinite conscious existence that is spontaneously blissful. You know, if one is and one is all knowledgeable with no conditioning, then bliss is a natural outcome of it. One doesn't have to try to be happy. One doesn't have to make that a civilizational goal. Happiness, therefore, is not a civilizational goal. Finding that truth of yourself, finding that truth of the relationship with the world, that is a civilizational goal, because once you have that, happiness cannot, that deeper happiness cannot but be the birthright of such an individual.
That puts a lot of things into perspective, Anuradhaji, that abhyudaya, the material prosperity, cannot happen if one loses touch with nishreyasa, the ultimate good, that prayers should not subsume shreyas, and so on. Thank you for that. And I would like to come back to a particular thing that you said earlier. You have urged us to seek deeper implications of words. And if I have your permission, I would like to inform our audience, especially those of you who did not have the chance of personally interacting with Anuradhaji so far. Anuradhaji always emphasizes on using specific words in their contexts, and she uses Sanskrit words to indicate certain concepts which cannot be really translated, which cannot be captured in any other language. So, where do you see translation as a practice, as a field of study, as a field of human activity, is placed in view of the larger issue that we are talking about today, that of words containing civilizational codes? What is the place of translation then?
Yes. So I again have another student, Snigdha, who is working on the concepts of dharma, ethics, and morality, and to see whether these are synonymous, because they're used synonymously. Texts that don't, believe in using original terms would tend to use ethics and morality, and even as people from this land, even we don't really understand the differences between the subtle differences that underlie these words. So the fact is that uh, words, especially important conceptual words, are direct outcomes of the vision of certain realities of existence. And that's what I mean by the worldview of a civilization. So, different civilizations, through their respective investigations of making sense of the world, arrived at different seeings. And those seeings led them to conceptualize certain terms, which, for all who were initiated into that language, were familiar with those terms, and therefore, philosophers became the leaders of society, spontaneous leaders of society once upon a time. Because they are the ones who had that understanding, that deeper understanding, and they became natural leaders because they had the clarity on where individuals and societies should move. Uh, and it's in this context that if two cultures don't have similar foundational worldviews, we can have a loss of translation, loss of meaning in translation, which is inevitable, which is inevitable. Uh, in a reverse way, I was also working on language in one thesis at some point and came across this fact that the word private is a very English term. And in Sanskrit, when we are trying to do that, we are really struggling to find a similar notion, because the notion of private is a non existing concept pre postmodern era for the Indian society. Like, what do we mean by private space? All there is one space. If you go to a civilizational concept, eko ham bahusyam, it's just one truth. There's one thing. Therefore, there's no concept of patent. Because who can patent a knowledge that is already there and anybody can get to? So these ideas were not there. They are introductions of a modern capitalistic society that has certain requirements of the individual and the importance of the egocentric person, and therefore you need a certain private space because your individuality has to be respected. When I'm saying these things, I am by no way trying to imply that the individual's uniqueness should not be respected. But the whole notion of private and the right to this privateness of one's existence has the dangers of becoming exaggerated into the selfish existences of individuals, which are divorced from the larger collective reality of which they are a part. So translation has the dangers of reducing the original content. And when it comes to Sanskrit, it is a tragedy, I would say, because the Sanskrit words are derived from root sounds. And those root sounds, if you look up a dictionary, have various potential meanings. So when you offer a one word translation of a Sanskrit term, it would necessarily be a limited representation of that original truth that the Sanskrit word would imply. Because Sanskrit word is also it describes the function of a thing rather than being just a nomenclature in itself. And it's in this context that I would also like to mention that a simple example, I would like to highlight a simple example. Like in my class, we were looking at this word he. So every word is coded. In grammar, words are coded. So if I tell you the word he, what are the pieces of information you have? You know that it's a masculine word, you know that it's a
Yeah.
singular third
Yeah.
person pronoun, and that it is a subject case.
True.
You have all that. Now in Sanskrit, we have the word saha, but saha means that he. Saha also gives you distance. So if I wanted to do a translation of the term saha into English and I just did he, I have already removed the idea of the he that versus he this, eshaha or ayam. Huh? So I have already taken out an important component. And why an important component? Because when I say soham, I am saying he that, but again, when I say he in the English language, it is very strictly gender specific. But the term saha is not necessarily as restricted to the gender of the object. It corresponds to the gender of the word that is denoting an object. I'll give you an example. The word daraha is a feminine, I'm sorry, it means wife, but it's a plural masculine word. It's a masculine word, but it corresponds to a female reality. So Sanskrit is very, very disruptive, mentally, intellectually disruptive in the way it presents reality, and seems to forever make the mind break out of these these conformities of either one word gender with a object masculine, or it has to be for example, or distance. There are so many other aspects that Sanskrit liberates the mind from in very subtle ways, in very, very subtle ways. So when I say soham, I am not just saying that he I am. So a woman would say, how can I say soham? I am not he. there is this dissonance that takes place. But if I understand that Saha need not be a masculine Saha, Saha Purushaha, and Purushaha is by no means limited to the biological representation of that being. That Purusha is the supreme being. It happens to
Yeah.
have a masculine ending, but it is by no standards a masculine word. I
Yeah.
had this huge debate with this Dr. Ananya Bajpai in one of the Sanskrit conferences last year, where they had this position that Purusha, the Purusha Sukta is about the male, it is masculine. I said, just to make that accusation implies that you don't know the very way the Sanskrit language is formatted.
For example, how does one explain such masculine words which have a feminine ending, like a?
So that is when the root, so pita, for example, pita has a root pitra. And then you have Panini's hardware, which will say that pitra will become pita, just like matra. So again, it is not dependent on the gender necessarily. If words are r ending, they will get an a for the masculine. I mean, for the first case, the subject case. Now the
Right.
karta will be in that form. But that doesn't make it masculine, I mean, feminine in any way. So Sanskrit somehow always requires us to want to look for the truth of the word. And that's why I often say that Sanskrit is a language that has the potential of fine tuning our consciousness to truth itself. If one grasps the spirit of this language, because it doesn't allow you to be at any level, neither at the level of its pronunciation, nor at the level of its word formations, nor at the level of its sentence structures, does it allow you to rest with the preferences of mental constructions of reality.
Right.
They keep pushing it. It will keep pushing it and doing away with it, and showing you the fact that truth is beyond all of this. And there is truth, and therefore the sounds are not amenable to our personal preferences, because the mathematical precision of the arrangement of the universe. It's a bit like our internet, that if you put a capital A for a small a in a password, that particular portal will not open. So in this huge web of vibrations, if you want to get the best opening of the secrets of existence, then precise pronunciation is helpful, which again requires a certain quest for truth from the mind level in terms of the vaikhari, the articulation. A quest for truth articulation is important, because having said it, it's true that if you have the right inner frequency, that it's much more important to have the right inner vibrations, and then you can say abracadabra, you'll still have the realization, versus saying it all perfectly and have it all messed up inside. So those perspectivizations are also there, and it's also true, absolutely true. But if one is a genuine seeker of truth in an integral manner, then why would not one want to also articulate that precision? And that articulation is beyond whether you like to do it this way or you do it because that is to be done. Ritam, Shreyas, and you do it, that's it. So it has some fabulous properties. Fabulous, absolutely.
So a lot of takeaways there for people who engage with right to privacy, also dynamics between different genders through language, and as Anuradha ji shows us that Sanskrit, instead of making you categorized into different boxes of genders or sexes, it urges you, it leads you towards a path which frees your mind, which changes your the very conditioning that gives rise to such categories. So, very fascinating. I would like to go on to the next question, where I'm concerned with the use of words, Indian words especially, from Indian languages like Sanskrit and Hindi, in English and other languages. So we have seen in recent times that several Indian words, Sanskrit, Hindi, Gujarati, and so on, have become part of the standard English dictionaries. And my concern, my question to you would be, are these words being used in their proper connotations as we would use in India in our day to day conversations when they are used in English? Or is there a chance, uh, however small, of such words getting subsumed, getting absorbed in the linguistic cultural universe of English?
My experience is that when words from one culture, especially Sanskrit words, have been adopted into the English language because of the absence of an equal vision underlying the term in the language of adoption, there is necessarily once more a reduction of the original content, and therefore therefore a banalization, a rendering of the term, a more bourgeois rendering of the term in daily application. So simple words like mantra. So the very word mantra means mananat trayate iti mantra, and mantra originally represents a systematized sound technology which had to do with satya shravana and satya darshana. So the truth seeing and the truth hearing is what through the levels of para, the seeing of the highest, that the highest existence, then the translation of that through the seeing, through the inner instrument and the expression. So the para, pashyanti, madhyama, and vaikhari levels, and that expression of vaikhari in direct connection with the para. I mean, there's a huge philosophy that underlies the concept of a mantra. And then the fact that mananat trayate iti mantra, that you keep repeating that and you are liberated, you're protected. So that has to do with the larger understanding that we are beings of vibrations, and therefore the words we use has an effect on who we are, how we perceive the world. So can one align oneself to the deeper truth within, so that the words we utter are powerful and truthful to whatever extent possible. But that would entail a whole process of inner cleansing, aspiration, inner cleansing, self control. So we see that there is a whole philosophy. I mean, there are volumes that can be written on just this concept of mantra. But when we use it as the business mantra, this mantra, that mantra, we have reduced a deeper idea into a capitalist jargon.
And in this connection, another word comes to my mind when you speak of mantra. Similarly, the word guru, which has been used so casually, as you put it very beautifully, in a bourgeois manner, like a marketing guru or a management guru. So this guru definitely does not shows you the path to remove your inner dross or inner darkness, right?
Exactly. The other word that is very frequently used today is yogi. And in our yoga circles, both my very dear friend and colleague Dr. Vinay Chandra and I, we always make it a point to let them know that the word yogi is one who is established in yoga. One who possesses yoga is yogi. And what does possessing yoga means? One who is in continuous alignment of that state of samadhi, who's
Right.
always in relation. In other words, it's one who wears the quantum lens all the time and looks at the world through that sense of unity and oneness. Such a person is a yogi, and not spending 2 minutes on the mat and then you say, yogi and yogini, just because one has spends a few hours on the mat and does a few stretches and acrobatic movements, is in no way a yogi. And the dangers of such banalization of terms is that when we talk of Yogananda Paramahamsa or Sri Aurobindo as yogis and Swami Vivekananda as Mahayogis, and then you say that you're a yogi, there can be this huge illusion that happen, which is more derailing than keeping you on the track. So words have power. Words, especially words that have evolved from deeper spiritual realizations, they contain a certain power, and when one trivializes them, one does disfavor in a sense to that entire tradition which has worked very hard on themselves, which has invested a lot of time and resources and personal sadhana to come up with those understandings. So I think it's an injustice to the term. But on one side, so that's on one side where one would have a more strict kind of a view of such usages. The alternate approach to regarding such a situation of the adoption of certain terms from, let's say, Sanskrit into English is the acceptance that probably due to the popularization of these terms, it might just strike a chord in somebody because these words have their own power as well. So it might just strike a chord in someone who might want to just go up and look up the original sense and maybe change that person's life. So leave the possibility for that to emerge as well,
Right, right.
because I don't think any of this happens by chance. I think there's a much greater wisdom at work. So one can have one's, limited puritanisms and say that this should not happen and that should not happen. But the fact that it is happening, one trusts is in lines with a greater plan, and then one has to try and make sense of that as well. So,
Right. So, taking a cue from that wisdom, we will jump from mantra to nama. So, it has been said that in this age of Kali, the great age of obfuscation of knowledge and common sense, even the nama of Ishvara, the name of God, or names of God, um, are very vital portal to ultimate liberation. And how does this sits with a very curious fact that I have observed among especially Indian parents of the last 1 or 2 decades. While naming their children, they often come up with sound constructs which apparently do not mean anything. So, from a culture which puts so much of emphasis on the power of Nama, which can deliver people from their bounded existence, limited existence, to the ultimate understanding of the reality, to this frivolous use of sound constructs to name their children, such an important action in the life of the child as well as of the parent. Uh, how have we come to straddle both these ends? How do we make sense of this?
I think again it boils down to the concept of the civilizational worldview. So the Indian civilization, or the Bharatiya civilization that has its roots in the Vedas, was entirely based on the understanding of the vibrational nature of existence, and therefore the importance of any uttered vibration, because it is adding to that sum total in ways that can either be beneficial or disruptive or destructive. And when I mean beneficial, I would say that it aligns us with the existing sounds of the universe, and therefore it enhances or amplifies all that is good in us. And if it is countercurrent to that, then it will lead to its own consequences. But this worldview, essentially, of the vibrational nature of the universe, is a very significant contribution of our civilization. But it's not limited to our civilization. All true seekers of different cultures would have also arrived at the same truths, because the truth is there for anybody who seeks. So it is always important to acknowledge that this process of evolution is not limited to a landmass, or a cultural type only, a cultural group. It is the prerogative of all human beings, because it is a larger human endeavor from the cosmic perspective. So whoever across the world has this, has a truth seeking in them, is keen to understand the laws of the universe, is a practitioner of the Sanatana Dharma to that extent. Whatever the form might be that they connect with, or the sounds that they might make, but if these are all paths that are leading them towards the recognition, towards the articulation and the practice of these eternal laws, then they are followers of the Sanatana Dharma, whether they want to call it or not, or whether it doesn't matter. And therefore, the other way also, those who call themselves practitioners of the Sanatana Dharma, if they don't understand them, then whether they're really practicing the Sanatana Dharma becomes also a very relevant question. So, that becomes important for us to clarify as subscribers to a certain worldview. And so, coming back to this, the vibrational understanding of the universe. So, the rishis realized from the start that in the earliest age of the Satya Yuga, there was much less corruption in the internal systems of people, and they were more naturally in tune with the laws of the universe. You know, that's Satya, and that's why it was the Satya Yuga. But as in any organization, as in any system, the more the numbers increase and there is a distancing from the source, the more it becomes that truth becomes susceptible to subjective interpretation. And the more there is subjective interpretation, the more there is, in a sense, a corruption of that original source. And therefore, with the Treta and the Dwapar Yuga, there has been a distancing from those original ways of understanding the universe. So the fact is that this is an age of noise of every sort, starting with the mind, which is cluttered, the emotions that are cluttered, and in the age of social media, we are cluttering, over cluttering. As it is, we have our independent, individual, noisy structures, and then we are cluttering it with the noise of everybody else who matters and doesn't matter. And therefore, the way out of this, the easy way out of this, is to align oneself or to engage with sound that are conscious guides to realign our systems to the sounds of the cosmos. So the idea that there are laws, we are out of sync and out of alignment because of the noisy structures we have, and how can we bring back alignments within those noisy structures. An example could be like in a battlefield, if somebody plays the flute or a beautiful instrument, your senses get attuned to that sound and you let that noise go to the background. And there is the process of entrainment, and everything starts following that, and there's a resonance that follows. Similarly, and therefore, I don't think it's coincidental that Sri Krishna plays the flute, and he is the harbinger of this Kali Yuga. His passing is the beginning of the Kali Yuga. So I guess his passing and his carrying of the flute is a constant reminder that we have to be open to the sound of the flute in the middle of the noise, in the midst of that noise. And therefore, the repetition of these names, of the names of the Lord, because when we also do a Nama Smarana, we are also simultaneously being colored by the attributes of that Godhead, which also allow the mind space for that moment to be filled with an alternative, truer connection. And therefore, the Nama Smarana creates the effect of the flute in this battlefield of our existence. It allows us to resonate with truth sounds, with the transcendent representations in the human context. And last but not the least, in the context of the Nama, I think sounds like Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. So, coming back to Sanskrit, each of the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet corresponds to different petals that are associated with our chakras. So, when we are speaking in Sanskrit, and that's something that I would highly encourage everybody to experiment, because just of the sheer joy that it gives an individual, just the joy of speaking Sanskrit at an integral level of your body is a very different experience than talking about Sanskrit and doing all those things. So when we are speaking the Sanskrit language, and we are using these sounds, they correspond to the stimulation of the different chakras within our system. And when we are stimulating these different chakras, they are energizing our body in a very different manner than if you're just using words to denote certain concepts and ideas, etc., which doesn't have that inherent wisdom structure within it. So the Hare Rama is the Bija mantra, Ram is the Bija mantra of the Manipura chakra, and then the sound as we know in the Mandukya Upanishad, has to do with openness and connecting with the absolute consciousness. The Ma is that which establishes things within us. So just the Rama is doing something at an energetic and sound level, which has almost nothing also to do with the personification of Rama. Like it offers us that dimension as well. And then you have Krishna, Rishana, all the Murdha sounds, the cerebral sounds that touch the center of the palate. They are sounds that, or rather, this point is one where in Chinese medicine, Qigong, they say that there is an intersection of two important energy meridians in the body. And therefore, many sadhanas, many practices also recommend that you put your tongue there, because you're stimulating and you're balancing out those energy meridians. So when you say Krishna, you're actually activating those centers. And this is all very biological. This is all very physiological. We've not even entered into the dimension of the energetic effect of it, or the conceptual effect of it, and what it does to the right brain by imagining Krishna and all that he represents, and Rama and all that they represent. So the chanting or the writing also of these namas, of Nama Smarana and Nama Lekhana, Nama Japa basically, uh, is a multi-layered beneficial engagement. And the summary of it, or the crux of it, is the fact that it acts like the flute in the battlefield, and therefore allows the soul, the questing soul, to find its way home in a much easier, shortcut manner. And coming to the name the second part of the question about naming children randomly. So it's not again coincidental that names in a horoscope would have to start with particular letters, because in this vibrational universe, when anybody is born, they make an entry. That particular vibration of birth is a very concrete entry into the Earth's atmosphere of vibrations. So, as that entry happens, it is impacted by various sounds in very specific manners, by the planetary movements, etc. And those planetary movements keep their circuit in a very fixed manner. So that vibration is impacted constantly by those vibratory patterns and will have its effect. But at that entry point, again, the fact is it a neutral entry, or is it coming from a certain place with a certain angle, with a certain velocity? The opening of the scope for the whole karmic background, the backdrop story of that vibration as it enters into the Earth's atmosphere. So when it enters into that Earth's atmosphere, it is formatted by the biological vibrations of its parents, its own karmic stories. It's so many layers of vibrations make up the sum total sound of that individual. So we can have a buffet of sounds where you can spread it out and look at the different effects on your chart, and therefore make very specific adjustments. Or you can look at it as a sum total, as a sound, as a letter. And if you call a person with that particular letter, it can enhance the qualities of that person's life. And if you lack that larger understanding and give that up any name, it will have its own effect. And these truths are a bit like gravity. It doesn't matter whether one believes it or not. They are truths. And if one understands them and one wants to benefit from them, then it can enhance the overall experience, life experience of that being that has come in through the parents. But then there is also the karmic story of individuals. So it's very hard to pass judgments based on one's own limited understanding of the rights and wrongs of certain things. But I know, for example, my brother had another name and he was always sick. Then they consulted his horoscope, and it was proposed that they give a name, another name which he has now, and Ashutosh. And they found that the whole health condition was remedied. So very skeptical people can say that's just mere coincidence, but you can also look at it as probably connected with another science which is yet to be established.
So, a lot of good advice packed there. As we approach the end of this discussion, Anuradha ji, as I sometimes ask my guests at Shravana, I would also like to ask you to share some friendly guidance or even cautions in our daily usage of words in different contexts as we speak or write or communicate in whichever manner. What would such advices or guidance be?
I would not be true to myself if I did not say it, is that Sanskritam vadatu, Sanskritam pathatu, which means please study and speak Sanskritam if you want to experience certain wonders of the civilizational contributions that were made by this land. I mean, there are the words of the Sanskrit language are just like every word you take. Not when I'm saying every word, it's not literally every word, but some of these profound conceptual terms are such, or rather, they have the scope to open up such dimensions of our being. Just a simple word. So, on once, I would invite all of you to play with this language. So, just just have the joy of exploring this language if you've never done. If you have it, then acquire a sufficient mastery that will allow you the possibility of accessing our original text. There is a dire civilizational need to remember our lost knowledge traditions that are languishing in manuscripts across the world. So we need many more passionate people from various disciplines to take up the study of Sanskrit and acquire sufficient skill. Nobody's saying a mastery, but sufficient skill to want to explore this rich traditions that are waiting, the rich traditions that are waiting to be tapped into, our knowledge traditions. So, that on one side, do consider this as an ardent request from my side, as a follow up probably of this exchange, this listening. The second thing that I would draw your attention to as parting message is the fact that the world is a world of vibrations. We are impacted and we impact the world around us. So we are receivers of signals and we are transmitting beings. The more we are working on reducing the noise within our system through conscious means, the more we will become hearers of the signals of the cosmos and acquire the possibility of transmitting them in uncorrupted manners. And when we are able to do that, then the word we speak becomes truth. So the civilizational emphasis was on the conscious practice of satya in our lives. So, to what extent can we become bearers of Satya? So, when we said, Satyameva Jayate Nanritam, I think that leaving out the Nanritam was a loss for us on the whole, because it says that Satyam, truth alone wins and not the not right. So right now we have been, subjectivizing truth and making a hash of that particular statement and trying to appropriate it to suit our own conveniences. But that statement from the Mundaka Upanishad is about saying that that blueprint alone, the implementation of the blueprint, Satyameva Jayate, you will get brihat if you know how to do that. And not the not right, nan ritam. So your truth, my truth, if it is not right, it will not win in the long run. So I think we need to bring that in constitutionally once more to set, to correct certain measures that were omitted circumstantially. But having said that, the practice of satya is one of the most powerful ways that would allow us to receive and express the right thing at the right moment in the right way to the right people, and thereby allow us to create the realities we want to, that will further bring us the prosperity and well being that are our natural birthrights. And in the Yoga Sutra also, they talk of the fact that if you practice Satya, which is one of the yamas, the consequence of that is that what you say will be true. And then the word uttered will be true and it will be a mantra. A mantra is not necessarily limited by the source language. A mantra is truth expression. So every kind of truth expression which has an alignment of the self has the power of acting like a laser which will transform the environment in which it is uttered. So I think with these words, I will say an Om as the mother of all sounds of creation, and Shanti, 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 which again is uttered because of the recognition that there are these three levels of reality: the physical, gross physical, adhibhautika, the occult subtle or the adhidaivika, and the adhyatmika. And when any utterance, so we say the Om in the beginning because then the whole universe is prepared and listening to whatever will be uttered. And then we close it with the Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Then it's like a sound package that goes into the cosmos for all times to come. So nothing is ever lost. No thought, no speech, no act is ever lost. And therefore, use it all very wisely. Let us use it all very wisely. It's not just a piece of advice to all of you, but it is also a reminder to oneself that we all need to be responsible carriers, responsible bearers of the Vak Dharma, Dharma of speech.
So, on that note of reminder to oneself and reaffirmation, with a pledge perhaps to enhance our familiarity with the Sanskrit language and our agraha for satya or satyagraha, I'd like to express my and on behalf of the listeners of Shravana the Rashtram podcast, our collective gratitude to you, Anuradha ji. Thank you so much for talking to us and for enlightening us.
Bahu dhanyavadaha.
Dhanyavada. Thank you for listening to Shravana, the Rashtram podcast. We hope that you enjoyed the conversation. Watch this space, subscribe to our channel, like it and share it with your family and friends, and comment on our content to let us know what you think. Follow Rashtram on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at RashtramSPL. Visit rashtram.org for more.